thank you all for coming this evening. I want to thank Amir Murtaban for the invitation and for Mustafa Umar for moderating the debate, and most of all, Hamsa Tortzis for engaging with me this evening. Before I begin, I want to make certain things clear. I think very highly of the vast majority of Muslims around the world. I can remember holding hands and locking arms with my friend Farooq in Turkey. I have an amazing story, well actually it's a funny story. We were in Turkey and my friend Mark we were greeting each other, and as the customary greeting, we kissed on both cheeks, but my friend Mark didn't know which way to go, right or left, when we were saying our goodbyes, and so they both went left and they locked lips. And they stood back from each other, and Farooq looked at my friend Mark and he says, "We don't do that here." But the hospitality of Muslims all over the world have been absolutely amazing. I think of the bazaars that I've been to and the gift shops in Jerusalem. The customer service is absolutely unbelievable. I think of Nordstrom's, and I think that the customer service there makes Nordstrom's look like a 99-cent store. I mean, when Nordstrom starts serving hot tea, then we can compare. Moreover, I've had the pleasure and honor of taking the Qur'an and its interpreters with the esteemed and humble scholar Dr. Hamid Mavani at Claremont School of Theology. I've also had the pleasure of taking Dr. Zain Qassam at Pomona College. Moreover, I live and engage in spirited debate on a daily basis with my roommate Jawad, who's a Sunni Muslim from Afghanistan. It's important to know that I spent many years as a committed theist, as Amir mentioned. I spent the last 12 of the last 15 years of my life as a deeply devout Christian. I spent years evangelizing on the streets, attempting to persuade people to give their life to God. I prayed incessantly for God's guidance, insight, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, peace, and love. I went overseas on multiple occasions, specifically to persuade people to give their life to God and build up religious institutions. I was compelled to study religion academically at the Master's College, at Fuller Theological Seminary, at Claremont School of Theology. You may find it interesting that 11 years ago as a Christian, I rejected the Trinity on the basis that it was not taught in Scripture. I defended the notion in writing and in public debate that Jesus was not God, but the human Messiah in accord with the Qur'an. In other words, I upheld at least half of the Shahada, that there is only one God, and that God, according to the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran, is one person, not three. Although I am currently a truth-seeking atheist, since atheism doesn't say anything about what I do believe, only what I don't, I rarely refer to myself as such. However, I see myself as a truth-seeking, life-promoting world citizen that desires every human on the planet to have access to healthy, cruelty-free food, clean water, pure air, safe shelter, and access to health care. More than anything else, I long to see love, peace, justice reign throughout the world. However, along with most of the world's population, I still desire to live forever. In fact, if God exists, if God is reasonable and good, if God will make all wrongs right, I hope that I am wrong this evening and would be more than happy to change my view. Nevertheless, there is a difference and a distinction between what I want, what I desire, what I hope for, thus the term wishful thinking, and what is likely, what is probable, what I have evidence for, that is, what I know with relative certainty. I want to fly, I want to breathe underwater, I want to bring back to life the multitude of sentient beings that have perished prematurely, like the estimated 1 million Iraqis within the last decade, a considerable number of them women and children, the vast majority being non-combatants. Reality is that it's highly unlikely that I will be able to achieve any of these particular wishes. In like manner, though I hope a good and reasonable God is governing the world, I am compelled by overwhelming evidence to think otherwise. It is significant to point out that in a certain sense, we're all atheists. Given the definition of atheism as without belief in God or gods, the fact of the matter is the majority of us are already atheists in regards to the thousands, even millions of gods that have been worshipped, honored, prayed to, served, and promoted. There is Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, Ra, the Egyptian sun god, Brahman, the Hindu creator god, Vishnu, the sustainer, Shiva, the destroyer, the god of transformation. How about the goddess Aphrodite? Or Dionysus, the god of wine, Nike, Hermes, Apollo, Thor, Osiris. I have only gone one god further. While I realize that no one can prove or disprove Allah's existence with 100% certainty, I also realize that I can't prove with absolute certainty that goblins, ghosts, gremlins, or leprechauns don't exist. Somewhere, especially if they're invisible beings. Regardless, I don't need 100% certainty in order to have a high degree of assurance that these things, including the magical beings like Santa and the Tooth Fairy or Allah, do not exist. Since a hypothesis that offers the best explanation for the widest range of evidence is more likely true than other competing hypotheses, what I need to do is contrast the two competing hypotheses before us and determine which hypothesis better explains available evidence. Hypothesis number 1, Allah exists, roughly defined as a spiritual being who is omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly good, who is the personal creator and sustainer of the world. Hypothesis 2, Allah does not exist. You'll notice that my arguments this evening gain strength the more we suppose Allah is actively and continually involved in the world, while they lose strength the more we suppose Allah is unconcerned with the world. The reason for this is simple. A detached, indifferent God would leave little to no empirical evidence of its existence. Because the following arguments are evidentially based, they have little to say about a God that, for example, created the world intentionally to appear as if no God exists, a God that is merely an impersonal first cause, or a whimsical deist God who created the initial state of the universe and left everything else to chance. However, Allah, according to the Qur'an, is not indifferent, detached, or impersonal, as you know. The Qur'an describes Allah as the most gracious and the most merciful being in existence. Allah is portrayed as personal and active, promising, quote, "We will, without a doubt, help our apostles and those who believe in this world's life and on the day when the witnesses will stand forth." Surah 40:51. So let's take a look at the world and see if an absolutely benevolent being is consistent with what we find. Here's 10 arguments or lines of evidence that I think are better explained by the absence of Allah than by the existence of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for the physical forces that cause natural disasters. Planet Earth moves, erupts, splits, grinds, heaves, and demolishes people, cities, children, animals, anything and everything, and does not care. Just this last year in January, an earthquake hit Port-au-Prince, Haiti, ravaging a place and people already besieged by poverty and exploitation. More than 222,000 flesh and blood human beings perished. In 2004, an earthquake in the Indian Ocean created a tsunami that indiscriminately killed 230,000 men, women, and children in Sri Lanka. Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and non-religious alike were decimated. We know that these are just numbers, and we have no way of fully comprehending the magnitude of these kinds of figures. The greatest number of people that any of us have ever seen in a single place is probably at a sports stadium. Consider Angel Stadium. Angel Stadium has a maximum capacity of 45,050. The number of people that died in these two earthquakes alone is not just 1 or 2 or 5, but more than 10 stadiums jam-packed. These are not rare or isolated events in history. In fact, it's actually chock full of them, of similar tragedies. There are a number of the numbers are astronomical for floods, for avalanches, for blizzards, cyclones, droughts, and famine, storms, tornadoes, tsunamis, volcanoes, even lakes kill people. Putting it all together, just since the first century, well over 180 million human beings have been killed by natural disasters. This is not just 100 or 200 stadiums, but 4,005 stadiums filled to max capacity. Remember, we can't blame human free will for these. Surely Allah could have created a world without such forces that cause natural disasters. In fact, the idea of future paradise within the Islamic tradition demonstrates that it's possible. Surely, if Allah exists, the death and devastation caused by natural disasters is absolutely baffling. However, if Allah does not exist, such natural disasters are no less tragic, but at least we can explain them. They are the products of mindless forces like plate tectonics and tropical weather systems operating in a universe blind and indifferent to our struggle for survival. Thus, the pitiless forces that produce natural disasters are strong evidence for the absence of Allah and against the existence of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for tumors, genetic disorders, mutations, diseases, illnesses, and infections. Consider Wang Chun-sai. He has the terrible case of neurofibromatosis. Wang's face was covered with massive tumors weighing a total of 50 pounds. They have stunted his growth, left his bones undeveloped, caused his spine to buckle, restrict his breathing, a life-crippling condition that has prevented Wang from leaving his small village. Consider cancer, leukemia, breast cancer, colon cancer, the list goes on and on and on. This year, about 569,490 Americans are expected to die of cancer, more than 1,500 people a day. Consider genetic disorders and mutations like Tay-Sachs, an autosomal recessive genetic disorder. Precious infants become blind, deaf, and unable to swallow. Muscles begin to atrophy and paralysis sets in. Death usually occurs before the age of 4. We could also look at cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, cleft palate, conjoined twins, and literally hundreds of others. Diseases, illnesses, and infections. We can talk about AIDS, we can talk about tuberculosis, we can talk about the bubonic plague, influenza, malaria, measles, smallpox. If we combine these pandemics and diseases, we have over 1,060,000,000 deaths. This is not just 100 stadiums, not 1,000, not even 10,000, but 22,529.5 stadiums. We haven't even touched on the millions that die from lower respiratory infections, diarrhea, whooping cough, tetanus, meningitis. I can't ever say this word. Meningitis. I even have a note here. I can never pronounce that word. Yellow fever and typhoid fever. Nor have we mentioned a variety of psychological and emotional disorders that may not be fatal but cause an enormous amount of turmoil and suffering. If Allah exists, the misery and destruction caused by all these afflictions has to remain incomprehensible and virtually inexplicable. On the other hand, supposing the absence of a caring God like Allah, combined with blind, impersonal, competing natural forces that have no regard for human life, it makes sense. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for the presence of excessive, unjustified, or what is called gratuitous pain and suffering in the world. I'm not talking about the pain we can learn from, like touching a hot stove and you burn yourself and you learn something valuable, or the pain that can lead to a greater good, like a root canal. You know, we go to the dentist and we have a root canal, and obviously it's painful, but it's for our own good. There is no way a God who, according to a saying of Muhammad, is more merciful to his creatures than a mother to her child, would allow needless anguish like the intolerable pain felt by most people suffering from terminal advanced cancer. There is no justification, for they're going to die anyway. Why should they continue to experience pain? As caring, compassionate human beings, we do all we can to ease this kind of suffering with the limited means available to us. If Allah exists, He is said to be more caring and compassionate than we, and has a much greater ability to alleviate pain. Since we could not be morally superior to a morally perfect God, we would expect Allah to also do something to ease the entirely unnecessary pain of advanced cancer victims, but He doesn't. If Allah exists, then gratuitous pain and suffering cannot. There must be some ultimate justification, but Allah hasn't shared it with us, and those speaking on Allah's behalf have not figured it out yet. In contrast, if Allah does not exist, we have an explanation. The sensation of pain evolved naturally as our body's way of warning us when something's wrong. But since evolution isn't a thoughtful and considerate process, it never figured out a way to turn the pain off when there was no more need of a warning. Thus, the absence of Allah is compatible with unjustifiable pain and suffering, and because unjustifiable pain and suffering exist, the existence of gratuitous suffering in the world is evidence for the absence of Allah and against the existence of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for the silence of God in the face of adversity. Consider Saba Abu Halima. In December of 2009, in the midst of the slaughter of 1,400 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, in what Israel termed Operation Cast Lead, bombshells containing internationally banned white phosphorus dropped from the sky and into her home. After one hit her home, her husband, Sa'ad Allah, gathered 4 of their children around him, and they ran to another part of the house. A second shell then hit their living room, killing her husband, Sa'ad Allah, and her 3 boys, Abdul Rahim, age 14, Zaid, age 10, and Hamza, age 8. Another shell then landed, knocking Saba to the ground. She says, quote, "I fell on the ground and there was a fire. The room was full of smoke and it smelled very bad. 3 times I heard my daughter say, 'Mama, Mama, Mama, but I couldn't see her. Her 15-month-old daughter, Shahid, then collapsed and died. She herself suffered severe burns to her right arm, abdomen, left leg, and her feet, burns which doctors said appeared to be consistent with the illegal white phosphorus. Why would Allah allow this for one of his devoted followers? Saba Abu Halima is not alone. There are literally thousands and upon thousands with similar stories. Whether we're talking about the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Afghanistan, or Iraq, we can ask, and we should ask, where is Allah? Child soldiers, there are more than 300,000 children right now that are denied a childhood and often subjected to horrific violence, many witnessing the rape and murder of their mothers, along with the beatings and executions of their fathers. They are forced into more than 30 armed conflicts worldwide, conscripted into combat, often sent into minefields ahead of older troops, and sometimes used for suicide missions. Young girls are often raped or given to military commanders as wives. Sometimes they are forced to commit atrocities against their own families or neighbors in order to ensure they are never able to return to their home community. Surely many of them feel abandoned by God, and if not, in all honesty, they should. Human trafficking, slavery. It is estimated that there are more than 27 million slaves in the world today, more than at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Recently, 168 children between the ages of 7 and 15 were kidnapped or purchased by gang members in Romania and smuggled to Great Britain in order to beg and steal. Many of them were mutilated and disabled on purpose in order to evoke more sympathy from passerbys. Sex trafficking. Lured by false promises of jobs, thousands are forced to sleep with the upwards of 20 men a day at $20 apiece. $3 is given to them to pay off some so-called debt that they supposedly owe. Every 30 seconds, a woman or child becomes a victim. Child mortality. In 2009, 8.1 million children died before their 5th birthday. About 33,000 children die each and every day. Half of these because of malnutrition, the lack of safe drinking water, and sanitation. Many just need a mosquito net to prevent the spread of disease. One child every 5 seconds dies as a result of hunger. That's 700 every hour, 16,000 a day, 6 million a year. If God is not answering the prayers of thousands of praying mothers around the world, whose prayers are being answered? What can I ask is more sincere and devout than a mother praying for her dying child? All of this without even mentioning those who have no one to pray for them, like the many feral children, often abandoned or abused by parents, like Danny, who for the first 7 years of her life never saw the sun, felt the breeze, tasted food, kept in an apartment closet her entire life with urine and feces, dog and cat and human excrement smeared on the walls, mashed into the carpet, legions of roaches, everything dank and rotting. When she was found, she could only crawl, growl, and bark like a dog. She will likely never fully recover. Why does Allah not intercede? Is it possible to think God is helping college students find parking spots and pass their exams, hearing runny noses, helping us find our lost pets, giving our planes safe flights, but not helping the thousands of amputees, paraplegics, and more than 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 who died because of economic sanctions under Clinton? We are so fast to give Allah the green light, the get-out-of-jail-free card. He can do no wrong. Why are humans that have the power to stop this responsible, but God is not? Often, think about, those that are getting in their cars in the morning and they have a child that is maybe riding a little bike behind their vehicle, and as they back out of the car, you're the next door neighbor and you see this happening. Would it not be incumbent on you to say something, to do something to get the person to stop driving before they kill their child? And it happens all the time. All it would have to do is tap them on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, you're about to back over your child." And that would be it. The child would be saved. But he doesn't. Why should God get the credit when things go right, but not the blame when things go wrong? I can remember my cousin Jack telling me, when people go to the doctors, if the surgery goes well, they praise God, for a successful surgery. But if it goes bad, the person dies, they blame the doctors. There seems to be a double standard that's applied. I think we need to be more consistent. Now, it may be objected that many people have felt God's comforting presence or experienced answered prayers during adversity, but isn't it possible that the people who believe they have experienced God are mistaken about the source of that comfort? Of course it is. We all know that the mere idea of a God acting as a placebo could help believers through adversity without God ever truly existing. Consequently, both the absence of Allah and the existence of Allah can explain claims of feeling God's comforting presence equally well. But this is not true when it comes to explaining instances where Allah's comfort isn't felt. Only the absence of Allah has a sufficient answer for that. Thus, Allah's silence in the face of adversity, including child soldiers, slavery, human trafficking, the sex trade, and child mortality, is a significant problem for the existence of Allah, which asserts that Allah cares, helps, and embodies mercy and compassion. But it is strong evidence for the absence of Allah. This leads to what we might call the hiddenness of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for this. If Allah exists and wants his existence to be known, then isn't it strange that the evidence for his existence isn't stronger? Many religionists, including some Muslims, act as though God's existence were utterly obvious, and that if you deny it, you have a dark heart, a rebellious nature, or a moral problem of some sort. Even though millions despise Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mubarak, Bush, or even Obama, not a single person I have ever met denied their existence. It would be different if someone could say, "Come with me, Dan. Let me introduce you to Allah. Allah, this is Dan. Dan, this is Allah." If it were this obvious, then we could scorn those who denied his existence. But we cannot meet, shake the hand of, see, audibly hear, physically touch, or empirically verify Allah in any human and sensorial way. And this utterly abolishes the force of any claim that this personal entity exists. Some claim he is present through holy texts. But why would God communicate through ancient literature written in a language only a fraction of humanity can read, much less understand, given the lack of contextual clues in the Qur'an necessary to accurately interpret ancient literature? Couldn't he have at least provided a DVD? Few things seem more odd and plain, bizarre than God writing books. Just talk to us like I'm talking to you tonight. We all have ears. If Allah does not exist, the reason for God's hiddenness is quite clear. He's simply not there. Thus, divine hiddenness is evidence for the absence of Allah and against the existence of a God like Allah that is supposedly everywhere. Moving on, the absence of Allah offers the best explanation of religious history. If it were true that Allah has revealed himself through Islam, then would we not expect the religion's success? Would we expect the religion's success to be explicable through natural means? But rather would expect the religion to display unique and undeniable signs of divine favor. However, the religion spread like the majority of other religions by word of mouth, cultural diffusion, conquered territory, and religious rule. Losing military excursions like the Battle of Tours to the Christians in 732 are the kind of things that slowed Islam down. There's no clear, observable, noticeable difference between the success, failure, or hardship of Muslims and any other religious or non-religious people group. Muslims die of cancer, AIDS, heart disease, and car crashes in a way that is indistinguishable from every other religious or non-religious tradition. They suffer from Alzheimer's, economic peril, all the same. Muslims, like other people, win some wars and lose others. Many Muslims, along with other religious and non-religious people in the world today, suffer the heavy hand of Western hegemony. But, go Egypt. They're doing something very, very amazing right now. Again, there is no unmistakable signs of divine guidance, protection, or help. Now, if Allah existed, we would not expect him to have sat idly by and allowed historical contingencies to determine the success of the truth. Instead, Allah should have intervened to give clear, unmistakable signs that Islam is the true religion. However, there is no God. There would be no religion that displays evidence of God's favor, and indeed, there is not. Related to this, the absence of Allah offers the best explanation for religious confusion. If Allah exists, we would expect that he would have made the path he desires for his followers to take clear and obvious, so that we could have no confusion about it. In fact, it would seem that doing so would be Allah's moral duty, especially since there are unspeakable, severe consequences for choosing the wrong path. However, consider the rich and incompatible diversity of religious claims made worldwide. There are hundreds of religions and even more sects and denominations. Christianity alone has 33,000 different denominations. Even Islam experienced mass confusion when Muhammad died and there was no clear successor. Thus we have the Sunnis and the Shia. In the 11th century, during the Abbasid period, Islamic elites were split into two more factions: the Mutazilites, who believed goodness existed independent of God's judgment, and the Asharites, who believed God defined and determined it. The religious landscape is hopelessly confused and cluttered by conflicting holy books, religious authorities, conflicting opinions about God and the supernatural. However, if Allah is absent, then there is no truth in the God hypothesis for believers to discover. There's no reason to expect them to agree about any of it. There is no God to settle disputes or offer to find favor to any group of believers. Therefore, the multiplicity of conflicting religious ideologies in the world is evidence for the absence of Allah and against the existence of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for predation. Why would an intelligent, designing, and benevolent deity create a world in which the food for living sentient beings is quite often other living sentient beings? Why do many animals have to eat others in order to survive? Why would Allah create humans as edible beings, beings that can be eaten? Surely Allah is not edible, he can't be eaten. Why would Allah create animals as beings that needed to eat in the first place? Why not base sustainability on photosynthesis or on chemosynthesis or some other divine mechanism to avoid the predator-prey dynamic? In any respect, the daily routine of life on earth is a continual bloodbath of fear, hunting, being hunted, combat, suffering, and death. Every moment of every day, it's business as usual for animals to be eaten alive, narrowly escape, or even have their internal organs devoured from within by parasites. Some wasps, after paralyzing their victim, inject their eggs into its body, converting it into an incubation chamber for their offspring. As the larva develops, it slowly eats its living host from the inside out. And we've all seen zebras on Animal Planet, right? Zebras on Animal Planet, still alive as lions devour their entrails. Will Allah take credit for this? Who wants to be known as the architect of the crocodile's jaws, the teeth of a great white, or the venom of snakes? How could the sin of an ancient ancestor have anything to do with the speed of a cheetah? That thing was not built to outrun orange trees. Moreover, how do we watch a clan of chimps bite and tear to pieces another chimp because it happened to wander into their territory, and then persuade ourselves that this is the handiwork of intelligence and compassion? The absence of Allah means that no personal being is responsible for such brutal conditions. Only that is the result of mindless natural forces and a struggle to survive. The bloody and ruthless predation that occurs each day is inexplicable should we postulate a life-respecting deity that created it. Therefore, predation constitutes strong evidence for the absence of Allah and evidence against the existence of Allah. The absence of Allah offers the best explanation for the random and chaotic movements in space that make the universe almost completely inhospitable to life. The observable universe, you know, is a dreadfully dangerous place. From the vacuum of space itself to solar flares, radiation, extreme temperatures, reckless asteroids, black holes, supernovas, there's hardly a single place or refuge for life. Even in our relatively calm Earth and life-sponsoring solar system, rocks, moons, planets, asteroids, and comets are all aimlessly speeding around the sun in varying orbits that oftentimes overlap and intersect. You may have noticed that our moon is heavily scarred, nearly completely covered with craters, such as a result of countless pointless impacts. There's also the massive asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It's either the leftover rock that did not form into planets, or it's a product of planets smashing into each other at some point in the solar system's past. What is its purpose? It is beyond difficult to reconcile why a God of order and precision designed space to contain ice and rocks, erratically flying around only to slam into the moon, each other, Earth, or whatever else with no particular purpose. If Allah exists, it makes sense that an impersonal and mechanistic universe would be this unsympathetic towards life. It makes more sense that humans adapted to the Earth, not the other way around. Our planet was not made for or with humans in mind. Thus, the hostility in the universe towards life, including the random and chaotic movements of objects in space, is evidence for the absence of Allah and against the idea that Allah exists, which presumes an ordered, purposeful, life-designing, and life-giving deity. I have one more argument. For the sake of time, I'll skip it. So to conclude, the absence of Allah offers the best explanation for the physical forces that cause natural disasters, for tumors, genetic disorders, mutations, diseases, illnesses, and infections. It offers the best explanation for the presence of excessive, unjustified, gratuitous pain and suffering. It offers the best explanation for the silence of God in the face of adversity. the hiddenness of God, the ordinariness of religious history, religious confusion, predation, hostility in the universe towards life, and the argument that I skipped, which is the poor designs and flaws of evolution, which I'll touch on later. In essence, the idea that Allah exists must create cognitive dissonance by asserting attributes of God that make absolutely no sense given the data we have about life on this planet. So I am compelled to ask, if this isn't what a world would look like if there was not a God, what is? Thank you.